Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Drew Firment. He's the Chief Cloud Strategist at Pluralsight. Drew, good to have you back.
Oh, it's great to be here, Tom. Thanks for having me.
And let's talk about the topic of the day, really, and that is artificial intelligence. And that has somehow coincided with the idea of cloud because the cloud is the repository of a lot of AI algorithms and functions. And so just from this, looking at it from the point of view of a cloud practitioner, how can federal agencies best use cloud-hosted AI to, get better at their mission delivery?
Yeah, it is. It is certainly the year of AI. I think it's going to be Time Magazine's, person of the year, right? It's AI or die. And the thing I think we all have to be careful about is not to be just chasing another, shiny object. We've kind of been there and done that. AI is disruptive, but always anchoring, to your point, on the mission of an organization and working backwards from that and finding the right use case, right? I mean, people have been distracted with blockchain, Web3, containers, whatever it is. So, but I do think AI is fairly, disruptive. So I think folks should be paying very, very close attention to that. But there are a lot of lessons, I think, from the consumption and adoption of cloud computing that apply directly to AI for agencies, Tom. I really, as folks have sort of moved from a tactical consumption of cloud services to really trying to create value with cloud services, same idea with AI, right? It's not just a matter of, hey, let's go out there and just consume, AI and just as a science project, but really, how do we create value? And I think that value is really in two distinct sort of arenas. The more obvious one, I think, and the little bit more risky one is for customer consumer value. Still early stages with generative AI, a lot of concerns around privacy, hallucinations, bias. So, I think folks are rightfully they're correct in terms of being a little cautious about just deploying AI out to consumer facing or citizens that are going to be using it. But I think there's a lot of real practical applications internally, especially when it comes even to the use of cloud computing, right? The more efficient use of cloud computing. So I think that's really a great starting point, because really the promise of cloud was to get rid of all the undifferentiated heavy lifting of data centers. But realistically, a lot of the operations still exist with these cloud practitioners. I mean, they're still doing a lot of undifferentiated work when it comes to cost management or architecture, things of the security monitoring. So really thinking about how do you deploy AI internally in a little bit less risky environment to start driving the efficiencies and allow those cloud practitioners to focus on a little bit more, valuable cloud practices.
Yeah, you make a really good parallel there, because as people talk about AI not replacing people, but making them more efficient and augmenting the work they do so they can do higher level work, in the same way, AI is not going to get rid of cloud computing, but augment it in such a way that it comes closer to realizing the promise of getting rid of all that undifferentiated maintenance and operations work.
Yeah, I think, absolutely, Tom. I think when you look at the goal of artificial intelligence, at least initially, it's not to replace humans, but really to enhance our human intelligence, right? And right now, there's a lot of work that's being done that probably isn't adding a lot of customer value or citizen value or mission value. So how do you leverage AI to help to drive some of those operational efficiencies, at least in the early stages, to help unleash our talent that exists within the agencies and really, improve that human intelligence towards that mission. So I think that's initially where we can see a lot of value without as much risk introducing that, to customers, our citizens directly.
And as you point out, there's a lot of administrative type of work that goes on with cloud, because I remember when agencies years ago used to have to worry about their phone bills line by line, and millions of lines of phone bills that contained all sorts of costs that they wanted to avoid. Same thing is true of cloud, right? I mean, there's a lot of administration required to operate your clouds that are not really directly related to what the cloud itself is doing.
Yeah, I grew up in data centers. Spent a lot of time there. Customers or citizens don't really care about your data centers, right? They care about the value that you're delivering on that mission. The promise of cloud is still a little bit unrealized
Hmm.
work that requires to support a large scale implementation of cloud, and those are things beyond sort of creating the architecture as infrastructure as code, but certainly cost optimization. You mentioned the line items there. The idea of cloud, you want to be able to pick the right size of your virtual machines. So that's a great opportunity for AI to be able to help with the sizing of the capacity, and also to deprecate automatically. I know that the idea of cloud bursting and these load balancers are supposed to be doing a lot of that, but how do you do it in a little bit more intelligent way? So I think there's some opportunities for AI there. I think the other part, monitoring, is really where we're going to start seeing the use of AI. The aggregation and the summary of all of those logs, and to be able to present that in an intelligent way to these cloud practitioners to really help with the decision-making process, not just, hey, here's some alerts. My old pager is going off, or I'm getting a message that something's down or something's broken. But hey, here's the key recommendations, and maybe there's some initial remediation that was already done, given the severity of the incident. So I think a lot of that type of work can be done, and some of the training that can go on with those models can be very situational in terms of the specific policies within an agency. So that's where that training goes on in terms of how does this operate, and learning from the existing practices so they can make those decisions, in really the relevance tied to how that cloud is already being consumed. So a lot of opportunities there to reduce some of the operational inefficiencies that exist in cloud right now, for sure.
But let's back up even to when an agency is considering its cloud strategy in the first place. And a big piece of the cloud strategy is choosing which clouds to do what in. And this is not like picking a Ford or a Chevy, because clouds come with thousands and thousands of product offerings, service offerings with each cloud. And you have to decide where to use those services, where to host your own services there. I mean, a million decisions just to pick a cloud. How
Yep.
can AI, do you think, help manage the strategy decisions that agencies have to make in the first place?
Yeah, well, it's not an easy conversation, to be honest with you. I mean, the simple and maybe trite answer is pick a cloud, get good at it, and start delivering value. You really can't go wrong right now with you've got three major cloud providers out there. It's don't dilute your value proposition by trying to use all three and worrying about vendor lock-in. I know that that's not what everybody wants to hear, but you got to get going, and you got to pick something, and you got to start getting good at it, because there's too much context switching to really try to be multi-cloud from the get-go. There are use cases with particular cloud providers that are sort of best of breed, but that's a good problem to have when you get to the point and you're looking for those edge cases. Then maybe there's an opportunity to use that. I think the introduction of AI into the conversation becomes super fascinating when you're going down this path. Obviously Azure has done quite a tremendous amount of work already, and kind of took the early lead in this sort of marathon. You're 3 steps into a marathon at this point, so does a lead really matter? But that there are there's a lot of momentum there. Now you see with Amazon Web Services, I would expect they're already doing pre-announcements, but with reInvent at the end of the year, and the GA just recently of Bedrock, their managed service for AI, you're going to be seeing just a tremendous amount of ecosystem development that's going to go on within these platforms. So there's a little bit more of that. Hey, the horse that you're going to ride, your cloud, is going to also probably be the ecosystem or the adjacent sort of tools you're going to be using with AI. So that's definitely something you're going to want to be considering. So all of them tend to have pretty strong ecosystems, right? So again, it's just sort of pick one and get going, in my opinion.
And once you have decided you're going to leverage AI within a cloud context, what are some of the benefits agencies should reasonably plan on and expect?
Yeah, again, I think there's the two different focus points here. One is, ultimately adding value to the consumers of your agency's mission, right? So what does that look like? In the enterprise, it could be some things as simple as, the chat sort of bots and how to make them more intelligent. How do you go ahead and run models, large language models on your internal policies or your internal procedures, whatever it is, so that when folks are interacting with you, that they're getting real answers to you, not just sort of listicles of your procedures. So how much of that do you want to expose externally at this point, especially given privacy concerns? Maybe it's a better opportunity if you're going to go that route to start making something like that available to your internal agents, and then they are helping to use that type of internal chat to be able to better communicate and go through the information and policies in a much more efficient manner. So I think that's one opportunity, again, connecting value to the customers. Starting off, though, I think right now, with cloud in particular, I think there's a big opportunity to help improve the efficiency of our consumption of cloud, which ultimately can reduce cost. And as we are helping to fund the initiatives around infrastructure, as citizens, it's always a great opportunity when you're getting more for less. So I think there's a great opportunity there. With, again, the federal budgets being constrained, how do you more efficiently start using cloud computing and getting more value out of it with sort of less budget? I mean, that's a no-brainer in many ways. And there's not as much of the risk associated with it, with external, sort of privacy concerns. With that being said, I still think there's some great low-risk opportunities for pilots within agencies to start to do things around. I'll give you an example. There might be a whole bunch of internal policy documents in terms of how do we operate within the cloud, or how do we operate within this agency? Well, maybe there's an internal pilot that goes in and tries to figure out how to run some AI on that, create an internal chatbot versus, back in the day, I would have said, hey, run an internal intranet site, for access to your documentation. Now it might make sense to try to, learn how to implement that using small elements of AI that might be, low cost, to start paving the way and starting to learn some of the basic skills required and some of the challenges, because it's never digging the hole that's going to be the issue, it's filling the hole. And that day two operational sort of implications is really, I think, the one thing that folks are going to have to keep an eye on as they start getting excited about AI and creating these pilots and projects. It's going to be really the sort of the governance of them, the cost associated with it, the maintenance of it. And ultimately it's 20% technology cost, and it's going to be 80%, organizational change associated with that.
Interesting. And what is the architecture of this? That is to say, is the AI that you would use to run these pilots in the cloud itself, or do you have to have kind of an external way to access the data for your AI algorithm that would give you the insights into the cloud you need to improve the efficiency and so on?
Yeah, there's really, there's a spectrum of AI consumption. And this is where, look, at the end of the day, there's no other way through this than education, right? And education is going to start with leaders within the agencies, from technology leaders, and even non-technologists, right? To understand the language of AI and cloud, right? That's fundamentally important to have that basic literacy. And then to be able to go to some of the early adopters within the agency to what are the tip of the spears, right? Who are a little bit of the innovators, and who are we partnering with in terms of maybe a particular cloud provider? How do you maybe get a pilot there? And so, hey, we'll talk on stage at the next, public sector summit, but you work with us to help kind of create this use case. Those are, great opportunities for that. But the consumption of it really varies from almost like this build versus buy kind of mentality, right? And all of them have different costs and different risk. I mean, the simple one is like, publicly available sort of low cost APIs like, the Chat GPT kind of stuff, right? Then you go into like the models as a service. So I mentioned before, Amazon is rolling out Bedrock, right? That's models as a service. So that's going to run, on their platforms. They have to make it easier to consume that and run and train models. Then you're kind of going into, hey, how do we want to really build and train our own models? You get to some pretty in-depth cost and skills required to do that. So you kind of want to think about it more in this walk or crawl, walk, run type of thing. Even understanding things like tokens, token limitations, some basic things associated with that. That's just going to be part of the literacy with it, and then building something to get that fluency. And then you start looking for the applicability and connecting it to your particular mission.
Right. So in some ways, then the cloud can enable faster adoption of the learning needed to use AI. And then you can in turn use that learning to apply the AI to your cloud operations.
100%, 100%. And that's that models as a service that I think really is going to be the key sort of opportunities for agencies and enterprises to be leveraging. And that's why cloud providers like Amazon and GCP and Azure are so hot and bothered to get that out and create sort of that ecosystem. You saw a lot of that at Google Next, talking about integrating AI into sort of, a lot of their different tools. Now Amazon is doing the same thing, and you're starting to see it as a great example is in their Code Whisperer, using AI to help, really start to help with the coding process. John Willis, who's one of the, fathers of DevOps, was recently talking about, AI from a coding perspective, and says, what he loves about AI is it kind of gets rid of all the stuff that, he didn't like about coding and accelerates all the things that he does like about coding, and really using that even as a sort of a pair programming, helping to get feedback on the code. So same exact thing with cloud. So you're going to see more of those services really built into the cloud, making it much easier for folks that are already using cloud providers and have that fundamentals to consume AI as a service, for sure.
Right. So in other words, you can cook the steak, but you don't have to slaughter the cow and dress the carcass.
Yeah, and that's the whole, again, that's the whole goal of cloud computing in general. And that's going to be, as we abstract these different services and make them available for, the consumption of it. The goal is not just consuming the services, it's, how do I create value with those services? So I think the caveat is, again, lessons learned from cloud computing that are going to be applied to the adoption of AI is there's still going to be some day two operations associated with this, right? So creating that right level of governance, understanding the operational costs, understanding, the skills required to be able to do this, and really kind of setting up that tip of the spear, that program, the Cloud Center of Excellence, or whatever it is tied to, AI, to start thinking about things, but not to necessarily, we don't want to stifle innovation, right? We just want to be able to have it to be purposeful, managed, and supporting it so you can curate from those early lessons learned and then start to harden that for practices that you can use for, longer term efforts there. But yeah,
yes, and a lot of what you've said really then has the notion that there is some skills development. There's a human capital part of this to use AI in the cloud context. Maybe briefly talk about those.
Yeah, well, that's been a passion of mine for a while as a technologist for a long time, and building out a Cloud Center of Excellence and helping to do large scales migration. I wish I had spent more time migrating talent to the cloud than applications to the cloud, right? At the end of the day, who's going to do the work? And it is a paradigm shift, going from on-prem sort of legacy practices to this new sort of way of doing things requires a mindset shift. There is specific terminology associated with every cloud provider that's the basis of the culture of cloud. You have to learn it, and then you have to be able to be fluent in it, build something, go apply that language. Those are foundational elements now in terms of, especially as most folks are going to be consuming AI from a cloud provider. So getting that basic sort of cloud foundation is going to be really important for folks. And the folks that already have that are very well positioned to be able to now understand it's not going to be so much a revolution as just a natural evolution, right? Now, going into AI, I think it sort of heightens some of the particular skills that we were already seeing a shortage of. One, obviously, security. It's just going to become even more important as you're going through all of this data and trying to use it to interact directly with customers. You want to make sure that's obviously secure. That's the goal of as a service from the cloud providers. Is there's a big focus on protecting that data. And that ties us into the other one, which is data itself, the data quality of it, the aggregation of data, really your data pipeline. Because if you're going to be running your models or your language models, it's that data that it's going to be running it on. So garbage in, garbage out. So really sort of the data element of it, as well as the security element, is going to be really important with the understanding of, the general sort of cloud practitioner as, the wrapper for that.
Excellent. So we've heard a lot about the technical and the operational and the human capital sides of this. I want to thank today's guest. Drew Firment is the Chief Cloud Strategist at Pluralsight. Thanks so much for being with us.
Tom, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. You're watching Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the Industry Cloud Exchange.